Okay, I got a question for you guys to start out. What have we learned in our studies of Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers about the Israelites? Okay.
God was patient. He gave them a lot of grace, but he knew they needed instructions how to get rid of the influence of the Egyptians and bring them back to his way of teaching.
Okay. What else?
Yes. Oh boy. Just what I was going to say.
Well, they were that, but there's something else.
They were his chosen people.
Well, yeah, they were his chosen people.
But they wanted to be in control.
You got that right. But something else. I mean, think about all the studies we've done about. I mean, all three of them were Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers were really history. Okay, we learned a lot about what Israel went through and everything. But one point always sticks out to me. And then the point is, they're so easily, swayed to believe God. I mean, they're so easily influenced. You're right, easily influenced. Now, it's a good thing that God is patient, right? And has a lot of grace to give out, because every time he turned around, I mean, he went up on the mountain, remember? He went up on the mountain. Moses goes up on the mountain to meet God to get the 10 Commandments. He's gone for, 50 days? Something like that. A total 80 days he was on the mountain with God. And in that time, what did they build? Yeah, an idol. So, I mean, come on. It doesn't take them long to forget what God does for them. And that's the biggest thing with me, for me, with the Israelites.
They had a visual image of God in the cloud. And the visual image of the manna coming from heaven to say this is the real thing.
Right.
But they still would go back to their old ways, like the calf.
Yeah.
So they,
Well, and every time something went wrong that they didn't like, or what God was wanted them to do, they always complained, and they wanted to, what did they want to do?
go back.
Right, they wanted to go back. Now, this is an historical background that I'm going to go through. Just to kind of, for us to realize, where we've been. And Leviticus and Deuteronomy, there's a little bit at the end of it that's going to tell us where we're going. Leviticus is the middle book of the Pentateuch. It also gives us the middle of the story given to us through the Pentateuch. It is limited to material revealed at Sinai after the Exodus and before the wilderness wandering. Genesis gives us the patriarchal background of the Israelites. They were molded into a nation by Moses. It's not in your book, so don't look. Yeah. They were molded into a nation by Moses, the great lawgiver, at the time of the Exodus. Israelites left Egypt in the spring on the 14th of the month Nisan, the month that starts spring. On the 15th of the second month, they came to the desert of Sin. In the third month, they arrived at Sinai and camped before the mount. They stayed there a year. The second Passover was celebrated at Sinai. On the 20th day of the second month of the second year, the Israelites marched from Sinai toward Kadesh Barnes, the southern gateway to the Promised Land. The Israelites camped before Mount Zion just short of a year. During that time, Moses spent 80 days on the mountain with God. Then the Israelites, with Moses' instruction, built the wilderness tabernacle. That was one of the last things that we studied last year. Then, during this year, Moses organized the nation. He built up an army and established courts and laws and ordered formal worship. Most of the laws created at this time were secular, not concerned with religion or its practices. They are recorded in Exodus and Numbers. Leviticus is the law book par excellence. Its laws mainly emphasize Israel's worship of God and the instructions for the priests. Therefore, it does not address numerous prescriptions for secular court procedures and penalties. Deuteronomy, being a summary of both history and law, repeats some of the laws from Exodus and also from Leviticus and gives other details. Leviticus begins with a description of the offering for the great brazen altar and continues with the consecration of the first priests and the start of the tabernacle worship. The chapters that follow largely set forth laws for conduct for people that were administered by the priests. Now, in your book on page Roman numeral V5, it's important. I think this part is important for us to understand. Law and history are the beginning blocks of a people and culture. The law sets the boundaries for a populace in the present moment. History tells the people how they arrived at that present moment so they can move forward. Laws enable people to know the rules of a society and what is expected of them. History helps people remember what happens when those rules are not followed, so they are not doomed to repeat those past mistakes. The Israelites haven't learned that yet. The Israelites' exodus from the land of Egypt marked the end of a period of oppression in their history. It is constituted the beginning of the fulfillment of God's covenantal promise to Abraham that his descendants would not only reside in the promised land, but would also multiply and become a great nation. So at appropriate times on Mount Sinai and in the plains of the Moab, God gave the people of Israel a body of legislation, the law, to instruct them on how to live properly as the theocratic people of God. By this, the Israelites were to be distinct from all other nations on earth. And if you turn the page and go over to where it talks about the book of Leviticus, under author and date, authorship and date issues are resolved by the concluding verse of the book. And, a lot of discussion goes into over time about, well, did Moses really write them? Well, this one line tells you who wrote it. It says, "These are the commandments which the Lord commanded Moses for the children of Israel on Mount Sinai." The fact that God gave these laws to Moses appears 56 times in the book. So there's no doubt who wrote this book. And then down further, regarding the date of the book, the Exodus occurred in 1445 BC, and the tabernacle was finished 1 year later. Leviticus picks up the record at that point, likely revealed in the first month, which is either Abib or Nisan, of the second year of the Exodus. Numbers begins after that in the second month. In the background, this is the author's background. He's setting us up to start looking at Leviticus. Before the year that Israel camped at Mount Sinai, the presence of God's glory had never formally resided among the Israelites. Remember that. A central place of worship like the tabernacle had never existed. So now, they built that tabernacle, so now God has a home with his people. And we know that God lives in our church, don't we? Sure. Okay. Nor had a structured or regulated set of sacrifices and feasts been given. Furthermore, the office of a high priest, the formal priesthood, and a cadre of tabernacle workers had not yet been appointed. As the book of Exodus concludes, the tabernacle has been completed, requiring there to now be structured sacrifices, feasts, and established roles for the priesthood and tabernacle workers. This is what the book of Leviticus provides. The Lord had called Israel to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Up to this point, Israel had only the historical records of the patriarchs from which to gain their knowledge of how to worship and live before their God. Having been slaves for centuries in Egypt, the land of a seemingly infinite number of gods, their concept of worship and godly living was severely distorted. Their tendency to hold on to the polytheism and pagan ritual is witnessed in the wilderness wanderings. God would not permit them to worship in the ways of their Egyptian neighbors, nor would he tolerate Egyptian ideas about morality and sin. The instructions in Leviticus enabled the priests to lead Israel in worship appropriate to the Lord. And the next section, which is the historical and theological themes. The core ideas around which Leviticus develops are the holy character of God and his will for Israel's holiness. The Lord's holiness, mankind's sinfulness, sacrifice, and God's presence in the sanctuary are the book's most common themes. The book sets forth instruction in a clear and authoritative tone about personal holiness. Matters pertaining to Israel's life of faith tend to focus on purity in ritual settings, but not the exclusion of concerns regarding Israel's personal purity. In fact, there is a continuing emphasis on personal holiness in response to the holiness of God. On more than 125 occasions, Leviticus indicts mankind for uncleanness and or instructs on how to be purified. The motive for such holiness is stated in two repeated phrases: I am the Lord and I am holy. How are we unclean?
Because we have the sinful nature.
That doesn't answer it. How are we unclean? I want something specific.
We are unclean by nature. We were born unclean.
Well, yeah, we're born a sinner. The original sin falls down to us. But how? What are things we do that are unclean? Name a sin.
Thoughts, words, deeds. You don't worship God the way you worship Israel. Well, different churches have different rules how to worship God.
I'm not talking about other churches. How do we?
And not always do for a neighbor.
True?
We don't talk about it.
Our prayer
Yeah, okay. We lack a prayer life. What else? Yeah, we're not in the Word enough, probably, because we have to be in the Word to know what God wants, right? And that's how He talks to us. That's if we take the time to be still and let Him talk and listen. What else? This side over here is very quiet.
We're learning on the other side.
Oh, yeah, right. Uh-huh.
We're learning that whatever we say is not going to fulfill your.
Well, when I put that question in my margin, I expected a lot more. How we're on clean. You know. Are we always honest?
I said we lied.
I think our big problem is we don't turn to
That
God.
side hit just
for
about
his
everything, and it's
solution
still
to
zero.
our problems. I think.
Well, that's
We
true.
don't walk in the ways of the Lord 100%.
Well, no, we don't.
Go.
But that's like, you know.
We don't buy Charmin.
Yeah, well, you've all had good ideas. I just wanted more detail. I don't, you know, I want to know the list of things, not this big broad, you know. But okay. Repeat what you said because someone was talking and they couldn't hear you.
We don't turn to God to solve our problems. We try to solve them ourselves.
Well, yeah, because we think we're like God. We know how, we know how to do things. It isn't until some things get really rough, then we finally get on our knees, don't we? Well, every day. You know, I love it when somebody says, well, I haven't sinned today. Well, yes, you have, just by doing that. You know? I mean,
I
so,
had a relative that I know sinned.
yeah.
And it was, I telling phone that woman, she drove me nuts.
Did you try to point out the
No, you can't do that to these kind of people when her grandfather was a Baptist minister. I just let her go down her own little,
Rabbit hole.
whatever.
Okay, reading on. The theme of the conditional Mosaic covenant resurfaces throughout the book, but particularly in chapter 26. This contract for the new nation not only details the consequences of obedience or disobedience to the covenant stipulations, it does so in a manner scripted for determining Israel's history. One cannot help but recognize prophetic implications in the punishments for disobedience, as they sound like the events of much later Babylonian deportment, captivity, and subsequent return to the land, which occurred about 900 years after Moses wrote Leviticus. The astrological implications for Israel's disobedience will not conclude until Messiah comes to introduce his kingdom and end the curses of Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. The 5 sacrifices and offerings mentioned in the book were symbolic, designed to allow the truly penitent and thankful worshiper to express faith in and love for God by the observance of these rituals. When the worshiper's heart was not penitent and thankful, God was not pleased with the ritual. The offerings were burnt, symbolizing the worshiper's desire to be purged of sin and sending up fragrant smoke of true worship to God. The myriad of small details in the execution of the rituals is intended to teach exactness and precision that would extend to the way the people obey the moral and spiritual laws of God and the way they revered every facet of his word. What are some of the rituals we do to show our love for God and our faith in the church?
Saying
And not always in the church.
Singing the word, yeah.
Okay, that's good. Communion. That's number one, right? What else? Reading the Bible. What else?
Sing songs.
Yeah, songs, praise songs. And baptism, yes.
Praying.
Yeah.
Now mark that down for that side.
Yeah, we got one,
Yeah.
two.
Well, we got 2 points over here.
I think a lot of the problem with Israelites, and I don't know how long they actually lived, but look at our generation. I brought my boys up in the church, not necessarily Jesus. I know the one doesn't go to church, it comes to Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
He will refuse to go. They say they know God, but they're not following, and they do know God, but they're not following the ways of the Lord. They don't read the Bible.
Uh-huh.
My younger son started to, and then he went to Florida, so I don't know what he's doing there. But the older son, he broke his neck, came out of it, I would have thought would have been really with God because of his situation. And I don't know, I think he goes on, I'm a good person, and he is. And I'm this and I'm that, and he knows God, but he doesn't follow through.
But you know, that's one of the hardest things for people to understand, that that not everybody goes to heaven. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that, you know, that they have to be sinless, because we know that. But there are people out there that think if you do good deeds your whole part of your life, that you're automatically going to heaven. No, 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 no. And this is the hardest thing to get through to people, is that no. What do you have to do to get to heaven? Yes.
Well, I think my kids know that, and
Yeah.
they rely on that, and they know Jesus, but they don't grow in Jesus.
How
And
old are they?
42 and 36. I think the only reason the younger one's back somewhat is because he's got an 8-year-old daughter, and he kept saying, you know, you've got to go to church, you got to introduce her really. But I feel like the Israelites could have been the same way. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
their children did not experience the same thing. And I think if the parent, even no matter how hard the parent tries to install it on them,
They have to want it.
right, the younger generations slip away until they're proven, and then they would do it, and they're young. I mean, look at our church, our middle
Yeah.
age group is not there.
Yeah.
And
That's how many churches are closing.
right, right, and a lot of them are because, you know, well, first of all, I think college is the worst thing that ever happened to all of them.
Oh yeah, I had a granddaughter that started college and was a true believer. And I mean, she was in Sunday school, and I mean, did everything. And goes to college, has one professor, and now she doesn't believe in God.
Well, my boys believe, but they don't believe.
No, she does not.
Yeah, well, I
In
remember
fact,
that too.
uh,
They don't believe, they believe, but they also believe they're first.
Yeah.
They believe what? They were taught to be first. It was all about them.
Yeah.
And
God
the more I
isn't
talk
first
to
in their
people-
life, they are.
Yeah, the more I.
But that's
talk
what
to
happens
people
with the
about
Israelites.
What happened, right?
They think they're boss, right? So, you know, and don't we do that though? I mean, don't we think, oh, well, I can take care of this. I don't need to pray to God, I can do this.
I don't know, I've always had God at my back. And I've often asked him.
Well, so have I, but that doesn't mean I'm listening to
On
him.
that dark road, me praying, if you'd seen these tears, I was pitiful. So God was always at my back. Maybe it's because the way some of us stayed in the faith, were sincerely.
Yeah, well, and that's true,
And
because,
I'm gonna think different than my neighbor that, what is that old saying? Eastern, I belong to the church of C and E.
oh
And
yeah,
I didn't know
Christmas
what
and,
that was for
Christmas and
years.
Easter.
Yeah, because I asked her, what is that? She goes, Eastern Church.
What is it?
No, Easter and Christmas.
Yeah. The
Eastern
Church
Christmas.
of E and C. And I thought, I'd
Wow.
ask them.
I've never heard of that.
Me neither.
Oh, really?
I thought of if you were younger, and I used to get so aggravated because we would go all the time, and then you come on Easter and Christmas and community here, and I'm at full time.
I've
You
come
didn't
here
get a
and couldn't
seat.
get a parking place.
And I'm like, wait a minute, ridiculous.
Yeah.
Which is not the way it's supposed to be taught.
But it was in
True.
called
Because even your
priesters.
parking
Right.
place
Oh,
that we had the-
Priesters.
I've never heard that.
Again, but, yeah.
Yeah.
The Israelites, like when all that traveling, they had the visual, that cloud. They had food in their bellies from the mountain.
But you know, but the bottom line is those people, they didn't get to go to the promised land, remember?
That's right.
They all died off. There's only two people out of that,
Jacob and Caleb,
Joshua. It's Joshua.
Yeah, because they were the ones that went into the promised land and brought back a positive attitude.
Well,
Where's
yeah,
the rest
positive,
of
yeah.
What is the remnant? You said that many
Oh.
times. What does that mean?
It's a certain number of people that God always keeps a remnant of his people. And of course, they're Israelites. And he'll, so basically, the children of the ones that died, and Joshua and Caleb were the remnant that went into the promised land. And then they build up from there again, but every time.
Kind of like the original. Yeah.
Bread.
Yeah.
Bread. Well, I like that.
Yeah.
To put it in a way where I can understand it. That's
But
kind of like what it
grows.
is in a
You
way.
take a small portion and you feed it and it grows. So, yeah.
It all comes now. We say that?
I can understand where you're coming from with that, but aren't we supposed to be all a group? I mean, we certainly have fellow believers in other churches that are Christian churches, but even we have differences from some of them. And so I think to be a remnant, you would have to believe totally in what God says for us to believe it.
I think part of the problem when you talk to people, you say, well, do you believe in God? But, and they'll say, yes, but do you believe in Jesus? And you never go that far.
True, I agree with you.
Well, yeah, because even, I haven't seen this statistic for a while, but, they'll say, if they ask 100 people, a huge number, 80 to 90 of them will say, yeah, they believe in God. But what do they believe? Who do they believe he is?
You know what's even worse, they'll go, yeah, I believe in God, but I keep my faith personal, which means they don't believe in anything.
Oh,
That's
geez,
really
I've
what
said
it
that
means.
though.
It's their
Rather-
safe haven now not to
Yeah.
answer a question.
Because they,
Obviously, I believe in a higher power.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the,
Well, my husband was what they call an agnostic. He believed in a higher being, but it wasn't necessarily my God.
Well, you know what I get a lot is, oh, I'm spiritual, I'm spiritual, I'm not organized religion. And I'm like, you know what, I
And just what does that mean?
There's no sense starting an argument. But I'm like, you know what, Satan is spiritual. So
Yeah,
you
well,
believe
that's
it.
true.
Yeah, no, a lot of
if you get right down to it, football's spiritual.
really.
Well, everywhere you go, every radio station you listen to, every TV station, what are you hearing about right now?
Super Bowl.
Yes, it's like its own little religion, isn't it?
You hear more about that than you do Christmas and Easter.
That's true.
But when you have a religion, and then within that religion, the families have traditions. And then they keep passing the religious tradition down to generation to generation without bringing down the harmony of Jesus with it.
Yeah.
So, I'm gonna say Mormons, they have generations and generations of Mormons that came across the plain. So they had Pioneer Day. They worship candy, all the pioneers, the people dress up. But they turned their backs on the real meaning somebody rewrote it for them.
Yeah.
So they're following a traditional religion rather than honoring the real, true meaning of the Bible.
Jesus was the prophet, they don't.
Right, he's
Yeah.
the brother of. So that's what I mean, they're following, in Japan, even over in China, they have a traditional religion of Buddhism. But they don't have the foundation that we have in Jesus.
Yeah.
So their tradition is just, it's blabber, it's a waste of time.
I think there's a lot of people that have Christmas and they don't have anything to do with it.
I know.
Yes,
Christmas.
absolutely.
There you go.
You're- well, that's true.
Decorations.
But they forget why there's a Christmas.
They don't, it's not even important to them.
No.
They're just celebrating Christmas.
Well,
Right.
Easter, I have a cross, that's a big metal cross with the purple thing, and I put it out in my yard, and I always do things cheaply, but they work. I have a solar light that shines up on my cross in the middle of my yard,
I think this just.
and I
speaks to
leave it there, for the longest time.
How Satan rules our world. So he says, oh yeah,
Yeah.
this is great, go ahead and do that, you're a great person.
Yep.
Well, I'm confused.
And I don't think they talk about that in church enough.
Yeah.
My aunt believes, and she says she's a Christian and all that, but her husband, and so was her first husband, were doing the temple. And
They were what?
doing the temple.
Yeah.
They were,
Yeah.
Masons.
Yeah.
And, you know, she lives on the back of the hospital, St. Jude, and
Yeah.
they support it. And I agree that's a great thing, but I also agree, I think that, I'm not saying I wouldn't have used it, God forbid I needed it. But I think that's Satan's way of pulling people away from Jesus and into the fact that this, you know, Mason.
Yeah, my mother was easier to star.
Yeah, my
And I was
I think a
amazed
lot of
at the
people
witchcraft
don't-
in it.
I don't think a lot of people realize when you're doing what that actually means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her husband, who died recently, which is why it bothers me, is she said that, oh, now you'll be in the temple in the sky. And I'm thinking, oh my God,
Yeah.
you know, and they had the people come into his funeral and do the whole ceremony. I got up and, you know, he left, we didn't stay for that part. But she just can't get, you can't get through to her. She's 93 years old, has a lot of, not a lot of problems, she's pretty healthy, but kidney failure, which she's doing dialysis, and whenever you've had any of us have any of this, she gets very angry and says, I am a Christian, I really believe in God. I was a pillar of the church. And it's like, what the hell is a pillar of the church?
Oh, it's like,
You don't
you
even
don't
go
go
to
to
the
the
church
church
anymore,
anymore.
you know, and it's like, it's sad because you don't know how to approach, especially when they're, like I said, God hardens hearts.
Well, and she's closed her mind to it.
Oh, yeah.
She don't want to hear what you have to say.
She's Christian, but she's also,
Well, in her mind, she's Christian the way she is a Christian.
Right.
That's-
I have
that's
a
okay.
question that you brought that up. I've thought of this before, but just brought it up. Our fleshly body is sinful, but yet we also have a soul. So when we die, our soul leaves our body. So does that mean our soul is sinless? If we can go up to Jesus?
No.
Or does it still have sin?
Jesus talks for us.
Right.
Remember, we've said, Jesus stands between us and the
Between us
Father,
cross, so our
because
soul is still
the Father
sin.
cannot see any sin.
And Jesus is our lawyer, and then we go. All right.
Well, I don't know about being our lawyer,
Oh,
but
was
he,
standing
but
there
he's
saying,
there. I
"No,
mean, he
was
talks
there
for
when
us.
they
The
said."
Holy Spirit talks to us through our prayers.
Right. But our mind, body, soul.
I mean, when we were baptized, the Holy Spirit was a gift to us.
Right.
But
But so when my soul's going up there to heaven, and Jesus is there, he's going to vouch for me, I remember.
right,
So
That's
therefore,
true.
what sin my soul had, he's going to go gone. Well, you know, how
well, she's hoping
thinking I'm a butterfly.
she's hoping she gets her wings.
and we'll be part of that final judgment, even though we
We'll see.
we are so far. We are the final
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know, I've read somewhere, and this could be, I'm getting us off track, I'm sorry. This could be, but I think the final judgment ranks us to what will serve him in heaven. Or thereabouts. I don't know. I'm just saying.
I've never heard anything like that. I've never seen it in Scripture.
Well, yeah, it might not be, I don't know, as I said, I heard that, and I don't even know where I heard that, but.
I just heard
it's
something too
someplace
that
in
said
heaven.
when you go to heaven, I mean, I don't know if this is true or not, but when you go to heaven, depending on how you were on earth, you're still gonna go, but you're gonna feel things deeper, like.
Well,
Understand.
we haven't met anybody that's been to heaven and back.
Yeah.
So how do we know what's happening?
I keep reading all these near-death experiences.
Oh. Well, I believe in that. I had an experience with my husband. I know things happen, and I do believe in it. My mother-in-law was near death, and she was in the hospital, and my husband was her favorite. Now, she would deny that, but I'm telling you, he was her favorite. We had gone to bed. It's like the middle of the night. I don't remember exactly. It was like 2 something. And in the morning, he sits up in the bed. Well, it woke me up. I got up and I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "My mother just said goodbye to me." I looked at the clock and the exact time. I asked Dad, my father-in-law, what was her time of death. It was the exact time that he sat up in bed.
Well, my sister died of leukemia. She had a little boy that she was like 16, and he was like maybe 5 or 6, and she always sponsored him, and they had leukemia. They had chemo together and all. And the night he died, she died, and right before she died, right before he died, he told his mother, "Don't be afraid, Laura came to me, you're going to see Jesus tonight." And that's a true story.
Oh, I believe it.
Chilled.
I believe it. I
And so
think that,
God
you know,
gives us comfort, especially
Yes.
if we're going. I think that's why people say, right before my mom died, my Tom, my Laura. Well, Laura was the girl I was just talking about, and Daddy went before her. So, I don't know if angels come to get you when they appear, but there seems to be comfort there.
I did a whole Bible study on angels. And I think, I sincerely believe in guardian angels. I think we all have one. We just don't see them. I mean, I've heard people say that they've seen something like out of the side of their face, and if they turn, there's nothing there. But there was something there. And I think that they're there. We just don't know they're there. And I mean, I've had a couple experiences where I think that if my guardian angel hadn't been with me, I'd be dead.
Think about being in traffic.
I mean,
Something happened, like. you look
well,
up, look at the
whenever
window.
I start on a long trip, like when I go down to Georgia, because it's a 10.5-hour drive, and I mean, I stop every 2 hours, but even so, you know, I say, God, have the guardian angel. I always leave my seat empty. So my guardian angel has a place to sit, because I swear, I mean, the way people drive today, oh my word. I have to,
the wheel from that song.
yeah, I have to ask God to forgive me every time I drive in my car,
And I think sometimes.
because they drive me nuts. They seriously, no. But anyway, let's do Book of Deuteronomy, and then if anybody has any more questions. Okay, the book of Deuteronomy, the only sentence in that first paragraph I highlighted was the record of Moses' words of explanation concerning the law. We're under the book of Deuteronomy on page 9. Author and date. Again, Moses has traditionally been recognized as the author of Deuteronomy, as the book itself testifies that he wrote it. Both the Old Testament and New Testament support this claim. And if you go down to the bottom, The majority of the book is comprised of farewell speeches that the 120-year-old Moses gave to the Israelites, beginning on the first day of the 11th month of the 40th year after the Exodus from Egypt. These speeches can be dated January through February of 1405 BC. In the last few weeks of Moses' life, he committed these speeches to writing and gave them to the priests and elders for the coming generations. The background and setting, Deuteronomy, like Leviticus, takes place entirely in one location in the span of about 1 month's time. The Israelites were camped in the central Rift Valley, east of the Jordan River. In the book of Numbers, this location is referred to as the Plains of Moab, an area north of Arnon River across the Jordan River from Jericho. It has been almost 40 years since the Israelites had left Egypt. The book of Deuteronomy concentrates on the events that take place in the first weeks of Moses' life, in the final weeks of Moses' life. And go down to the bottom paragraph in that section. The original recipients of Deuteronomy, both in its verbal and written presentations, were, get this, the second generation of the nation of Israel. Remember that. All of that generation from 40 to 60 years old, except Joshua and Caleb, who were older, had been born in Egypt and had participated as children or teens in the Exodus. Those under 40 had been born and reared in the wilderness. Together they comprised the generation that was on the verge of conquering the land of Canaan under Joshua 40 years after they had left Egypt. If you go over to the next page, kind of at the very top, it says the book of Deuteronomy, along with Psalms and Isaiah, reveals much about the attributes of God. And then down to the bottom of that section, Moses repeats the phrase, the Lord your God, to the people more than 250 times. He calls Israel to obey, fear, love, and serve God by walking in his ways and keeping his commandments. By obeying him, the people of Israel will receive his blessings. Obedience and the pursuit of personal holiness is based on the character of God. Because of who he is, his people are to be holy. So, next week, we start in Leviticus. And we have, if you look at page 1, it's legislation for laity. And it's going to be about, well, it's a little more than 5 chapters. So, I don't know how long the chapters are. I haven't looked that far ahead. But, do you have any questions?
Then bring in the cake, sister, and the bun. You were thinking that? I'm making
Well,
it.
next week I'm bringing something.
I knew it.
Well, I didn't this week. I didn't this week because I really didn't have time. But next week we're going to celebrate Valentine's Day.